What's the haps? I'm Moroka, and today I want to talk about how every game I love is doomed to failure. Super Monday Night Combat, Spiral Knight, Battleborn, Glitch, Wildstar, Pirates of the Burning Sea. Oh yeah, let's add Worlds Adrift to that list. So yep, this week the news dropped that Worlds Adrift will be closing its doors sometime in July 2019. In this video I'm going to talk about what we know about the closure of the game, cover some of the popular points of discussion surrounding it, and offer some thoughts on the circumstances leading to these events, as well as what lessons can be learned going forward for other multiplayer developers. First up, what have Bossa Studios told us? They've told us the game servers will be shutting down for the final time in July 2019. The exact date and time have not been disclosed as of yet, but will be an end-of-the-world party before it happens. The developers will join the game and they'll be live streaming it with a Q&A session. From today, all of the cosmetic items in the store will become available to all players until the game ends, and all cosmetic items purchased from the store since it launched will be refunded. If you purchased the game between April 29th and the announcement, the game will be refunded too. Founders who purchased the game at the top tier, Captain, will have their name recorded on the website as a form of digital monument. And all founders at all tiers will be given copies of Bossa's other titles, Surgeon Simulator and I Am Bread. As you'd imagine, there are usual common questions that have cropped up in the community. First among them is, can the game be given to the community or another dev to continue working on? To which the short answer is no. A game like Worlds Adrift is built using a lot of third-party tools, plugins and code, all of which are licensed to Bossa and cannot simply be made open source for the community to take over. Licensing is the reason Glitch is being effectively rebuilt from scratch, as only the game's assets were actually made public domain. Handing the game over to another developer has worked for other games like Spiral Knights and Puzzle Pirates and even Pirates of the Burning Sea, but in those instances the games were essentially complete and they simply needed sustaining by a small team. To take over a project like Worlds Adrift would require a team of comparable size to pick up a project they were unfamiliar with and then not only maintain the title but continue development to completion. Developers are understandably not jumping at the chance to do this because if it were considered a viable project, Bossa wouldn't be dropping it in the first instance. The reasoning behind this we'll get into shortly. The second refrain heard from a number of players is, I want my money back! The circumstances around which this is actually possible has already been outlined, but frankly this is a sentiment which I think smacks of the typical gamer entitlement. It's an early access game which comes with all the risks and trapping that entails, and has always entailed. Chief amongst which being that the game might potentially never be completed. If you're not happy accepting such risks, the easy solution is to stop buying games which are not finished. The details and caveats of such alpha, beta, and otherwise unfinished titles are always available on the store page, much in the same way a platform like Kickstarter makes you aware that you're not guaranteed anything at the end of it. You're throwing your money behind an idea you believe in and you want to see the light of day. But if you're not okay with losing that money, then you should always wait until it's finished and released. So why is it shutting down? Money, simply. As long as we live in a capitalist society, that will be the answer to pretty much everything. The game simply didn't garner enough interest to bring in enough money to Bossa to be worth pursuing any further. Quite aside from the salaries to be paid to staff to keep working on a title still in development, MMOs will always have ongoing overheads in terms of server costs and such. Rough Steam stats are available which make clear the rocky position Worlds Adrift was in. The game had somewhere around 100,000 owners, of which we can imagine about half bought the game, since Bossa gave away free copies at one point. The game has averaged less than 150 players at any given time in recent months, which is genuinely less than Spiral Knights manages, a game which has been effectively retired for 4 or more years. These are not healthy numbers for a game which was, by developer estimates, somewhere around 20% of the way to completion. As to why no one was playing, I would offer that it boils down to content. It's the reason Tulkas and I stopped, and I strongly suspect we're not alone in that. MMOs live and die by the content they can offer players, and it's why the biggest ones offer up new expansions every year or two. In my time covering Worlds Adrift, I've had more than a couple of discussions about the merits of Worlds Adrift versus Sea of Thieves, which are fundamentally similar games in terms of their appeal, and at the risk of ruffling a few feathers, I'll still maintain that Sea of Thieves is the better game because it actually has something to do rather than solely relying on user-generated and emergent content. Once you're bored of exploring in Worlds Adrift, which, to its credit, takes a while to do because there are a lot of incredible islands, user-created of course, all that's really left to do is to fight other players. If the same were true of Sea of Thieves, I would have exactly the same criticisms, except for the fact that PvP in Sea of Thieves is balanced, whereas in Worlds Adrift anyone without a highly optimized, min-maxed, obsessively tweaked ship is at a crushing disadvantage, or to the point of dissuading other players from actually playing, which is another point against it. Much of this content was in the pipeline, or so Bossa would tell us, Alliances, territory control, sky whales, there should be plenty to keep a player occupied. The problem was that by its nature, Worlds Adrift was terrifyingly complicated. A real-time, massively multiplayer physics engine was always going to come with a few kinks, and making the game actually work well without crippling performance issues or game-breaking item duplication bugs or whatever else they were facing detracted from actually being able to give us sky whales. Until then, players continued to grow bored and quit, taking their money and word-of-mouth marketing with them. There's only so long you can keep throwing money at that until you need to call it quits and focus your energies on something that people will actually pay money for. Otherwise, soon enough you can't pay your staff and nobody will get any video game. So what can we actually learn from this? Firstly, growth is king. Market your game. Keep growing. As a player who was heavily involved in the game, I never even saw a great deal marketing the game much beyond the audience it already had. The ridiculous stunt they pulled in London to make the early access launch must have cost a pretty penny, and yeah, I still can't envision it attracted the attention of many beyond the existing players like myself. If your game's very existence has ongoing costs involved, then your strategy needs to have ongoing income involved. If you're not convincing new players to buy your game continually, then the in-game store better be pretty compelling. And just to be clear, one-time cosmetic purchases are not highly compelling. I mean, I will buy digital hats till my dying day. I have a far bigger Pokemon Go wardrobe than most people, but I'm under no illusion that selling digital hats is a viable business model. To continue that particular comparison, Pokemon Go makes far more of its money selling raid passes to its core players on a daily basis than it ever does from the likes of me buying a hat once every few months. Secondly, content is essential, and here I'm going to come back to the Sea of Thieves thing. At launch, the game was rightly criticised for having very little to do. It boiled down to almost exclusively 3 kinds of fairly repetitive missions, and then sinking other players for sport, or, sometimes their loot. Players got bored pretty quickly, the player base dwindled somewhat. The same thing we've seen in Worlds Adrift. The difference between the two is that in the span of a year, Rare brought 4 major updates and 2 minor updates to the game, and that's even before the recent anniversary update, which added a ton more content again. Worlds Adrift, by contrast, has seen very little genuinely new in over 2 years of being open to players. Mechanical changes, UI changes, yes, and undoubtedly more behind the scenes making it all go than you could ever possibly imagine. But in terms of ways to actually interact with the world, the Blight and a bit of crafting are kind of probably about the only 2 noteworthy things that immediately jump to mind for me. There's really not enough to keep many players coming back for over 2 years. As I touched on earlier, that's not necessarily their fault. A complex work in progress of this nature would obviously demand their energies be focused elsewhere, but at the end of the day there's no escaping the fact that this is still a video game being sold online, and finished or not, it is still subject to the same market forces driving sales and the competition with other finished titles. Really, I'm going to suggest that what Worlds Adrift needed most was the backing of a big-name publisher. I understand the appeal of an indie team wanting to go it alone, keeping full control of their own project, but there is a very good reason you don't see many indie MMOs outside of very simple games. Bigger MMOs, and here I'm going to sit Worlds Adrift alongside them because of the sheer scale of the project, they take a long time to make. Years, even with a much bigger team working on them. That's all time you need to pay your team, from which it follows that the launch needs to be big just in order to recoup all those development costs, which needs a big marketing effort, which is expensive too. It takes a big publisher with infinitely deep pockets to be able to cover those costs up front, knowing they'll recoup them later. And even then it can still fail. Look at WildStar. It took hundreds of people 9 years to make, and it closed its doors after 4 decidedly rocky years. But at least the only people out of pocket at that point are a giant faceless megacorporation. I think those of us who played and loved Worlds Adrift saw the potential of what it could eventually be, and that, frankly, were it finished, it would be an easy sell to other people. But it wasn't finished. It was a prototype that was years out from being the game it was supposed to be, and now, barring some astonishing miracle, will never be. Is it too much to hope some philanthropic billionaire out there was a fan of the game and would pay to save it? Elon Musk? Bill Gates? Notch? At any rate, I'll be streaming the End of the World event when Bossa Studios announced the date for it, in much the same way I did for WildStar, so at least there'll be some small something for posterity. I do hope you'll be joining me for it, and I'll see you in the skies one last time.